So we can go ahead and get started. Before we get on with the actual presentation, just wanted to mention that if you don't already know, the cyber defense competition is this weekend. Technically, you can still sign up. If you're interested, come to the Lab Jam on Wednesday. If you don't know what that is or where it is, come talk to me or Keene after. What else? We want to talk about swag. Logan, do you want to talk about that real quick? Just gauge interest here.
So right now, IASG is in the process of getting swag for the first time ever, as far as I know.
Yeah, as far as I know.
So if you would like to be part of that, go ahead and create a design for some sort of swag, and then submit it. You'll actually email it to me. All the details are on our website and in our Slack channel. If your design is selected, you do win a free copy of it, so there's an incentive for you. And right now, I think we're planning on running this contest for about 2 more weeks, and then we'll have a vote to decide which ones we actually made. So.
Cool. Okay, and then just before we get started, one last thing. Since next week is the CDC, I know somebody had asked about continuing with the Codebreaker Challenge. So I was thinking the week after, we can look at times for that. So we can discuss that during the next meeting and figure out what times work for everybody. Maybe like in 2 Saturdays from now. So today, the way it's going to be a bit of a different meeting. I'm going to be talking about SQL Injection. We'll go over what SQL Injection is, how it works, how you can do it, how to prevent SQL Injection from happening. And then we'll have Keene introduce ISELab, or IASG ISELab, which is basically the club's version of its own virtualized environment that is basically the same thing that IceAge uses to run its CDC. So we can do a lot of different things with that. So security testing and educational stuff like we'll do today. So instead of me just demoing it on the screen, you guys will actually be practicing the SQL injection if you have a computer with you after Keene shows you guys the interface and how to get logged in and get set up and everything. So I'll be moving kind of quick so we can get to everything today. But if you guys have any questions at any time, just stop me. Okay, so getting on with SQL injection. So what is injection in general? Basically, you're inserting code that is going into a program or application that's going to run alongside, in addition to or in place of the existing code that's already in an application or program. And then the other part of that is SQL. So if you haven't heard of SQL, well, it could be pronounced SQL or SQL, and it stands for Standardized Query Language. So it's widely used for dealing with databases, whether that's creating them, modifying them, or querying them, which is basically extracting the data from the database. And it's used in a lot of different types of databases, like MySQL, which has kind of branched into SQL and MariaDB. Microsoft's got their own version, and there's a bunch of others as well. So basically just the basics of SQL. The way it works is you install a database on a server, such as Debian or Ubuntu, and Windows servers as well. And we'll be using MariaDB, the syntax and everything from it for all the examples pretty much from here on out. So you'll install the servers on a server. The admin will create a database, or as many that are necessary. And then within those databases are tables which hold the data that describes, or which holds the data that's in the database. And so got a chalkboard up here. Basically, you have a database, and that is made up of tables, which are basically just rows and columns of data and information. So this could be a user's table that contains like ID of the user name, the password, and then the actual name of the person. So like last and first. And so these are your columns in the actual table of the database. And the actual rows to it, every row in this example would be a user. So username being the net ID and password, you'd have all your users in this table. And so that's essentially, very simply put, how the SQL databases are made up of. Does that make sense? So tables go into the database. You can have as many databases as you want, as many tables as you want, depending on how much space you have available. So the most common SQL commands, basically everything you need to know to manipulate and extract data from and add data, you can use with those commands. Select is basically querying the database, getting information, extracting from it. Inserting is putting basically rows into tables. Deleting. Updating is updating information, maybe for a specific user. If you want to change their password, you'd be updating that row in the user's table. Create, you can create a database, you can create a table, and then drop is basically to drop an entire table or drop an entire database. So if you can actually arbitrarily run that drop command, which if permissions are set up poorly, and you can do that with injection, that's very bad because that means major loss in data. Okay, so actually looking at real SQL syntax, you can see that the select and the from and the where are all uppercase. That's common to SQL, but it's not necessary. It does help separate like the identifying SQL syntax. But basically, we're selecting star meaning everything. So selecting everything from the user's table, where the name column is equal to the username, inputted username, and password is equal to the inputted password. And so what this does is it returns all data from that specific row that's in the users table that matches the inputted name and password. Okay, so that's the syntax for MySQL MariaDB. And adding PHP into that, you've got the MySQLi_query function, and then you have here's a connection variable that would have, you would define that somewhere else and specify the connection parameters for the database. And then this is your actual query that goes into the second parameter of the function. And so when that's run, that's how you basically do a SQL query within PHP. And basically this is where the injection comes in. So this is a pretty typical example of SQL injection. You're selecting like we talked about before, you're selecting everything from users where the name is equal to username and password is equal to the password. So the $, in case you don't know, in PHP indicates a variable. And what we're doing possibly in the code above this is getting those variables directly from the user, whether that be inputting it into forms, which is your direct way to SQL injection, the way this is set up. So what we could do is we could input a name, for example, Sally, and then for the password, we can directly type in what is read here. So if we do a quotation mark or 1 is equal to quotation mark 1, now what we're doing is we're basically ending the password, not putting anything in for the password, and continuing on with that query and saying, basically, get all the information where the name is Sally and password is blank, or 1 equals to 1. Well, 1 is always going to 1 equals 1 is always going to evaluate to true because it equals itself. So basically, you're saying, select all the information from the Sally user without needing a password. So you're skipping that requirement. And so that is pretty much SQL injection at its prime right there. The next step is even simpler. If you decide not to add or not to insert anything for the name, and you just type, you could do or true, you could do or 1 equals 1, and you end the MySQL query with a dash dash. The dash dash is basically how you do a single line comment. And the reason the extra dash is here, from my experience, typically you need to have something after that ending comment for it to be valid SQL syntax. And so we're basically commenting out the rest of the query. So now we're saying we're not going to input a name or a password, and we're just going to say select from users basically when true, and that's going to give us all the information in the users table. It's just going to dump it all out for us. Okay, so this is a cool trick that you can use that we'll see later on that's useful in doing SQL injection, and it's the order by command within SQL. So this basically allows you to sort by ascending or descending order the data that you're manipulating or working with. And so if you basically start at a low number like 2, 1 or 2, and you continue inputting it until you get like a SQL error, you can determine the number of columns that are in a table. And so this is helpful, and we'll see why right now. Okay, so let's say I had a web page that was displaying information from a database, which you guys will see soon with the box that I've developed. But let's say I have it displaying the table in very specific manner on the web page. And so the only way that it's all going to display if I have the exact, if I'm querying for the exact number of columns that are being displayed. And so the way we can do that is by using this order by command, determine the number of columns, and then what we can do is we can use, like, let's say this query needed 3 columns. We can use null as fillers to get the information we want. So what we're doing is saying union, which basically is a command that allows you to group or batch commands, SQL commands together. And so we're saying union select the version and then 2 nulls. And so what that allows us to do is determine what type of database it is and what version. So that not only helps us because we're no longer blind to what we're doing, we know exactly what version, so maybe we can find exploits based on that, or we know the exact syntax that we can look into for further commands that we can run. Okay, so at this time we're going to have Keene introduce the ISELab and how you guys can get logged in, and then we'll actually start looking at the injection on a box. I'll run through some of it, and then I'll kind of let you guys go, and then we'll come back together at the end. But I'll let Keene introduce ISELab. Yep.
All right, so we're going to be going over a brief introduction to ISELab today. So if you don't know what ISELab is, we've been working on it for quite some time now, but finally it's ready for use. As Daniel mentioned, it's the same, pretty much the same environment that's used for the cyber defense competitions. It's identical to the environment that the classes have access to. So if you're in like 230 or 231, those classes have identical hardware. We've got our own dedicated host for this. And we're going to give you all access to use this environment for pretty much anything you want to do in terms of attacking or defending systems. It's pretty much all safe to do in this environment. So I'll let you get logged in here. So we provided a web portal for this. I'll show in a second if I could get the displays mirrored. Mirror. All right, so you've got a nice shiny web interface here, and the best way to get to it is to go to our website, which is iasg.iac.iastate.edu, and at the top here in the nav bar there's an ISELab button. It's also just /ISELab from our main website if you want to go there directly. And so once you're here, you get a nice screen to either log in or register. You will all have to register since you are new to the environment. So if you click that, you get to drop into this nice shell here. And so by default, you have to log in with password infosgroup. It says up there at the top. So feel free to follow along if you want to create an account here. It'll ask you for some basic information. You need your net ID, so I'll put mine in here. And it'll send you an email that you'll get pretty quickly. So you want to go type that in as soon as you get that. Back to that first tab here. Yep. Can you paste in here? I don't. 34E60B. Accept the terms and conditions. Create a password. Don't make it the same as your ISU password or anything else. That's not good practice. And it'll say account created successfully, and then you're done. If there's any error with that, let me know and I'll take a look at it, but it should work, I hope. Once you're done with that, there's an exit button in the top left corner. Takes you back to the main site. Then you're gonna log in again with those same credentials. Now, in order to make it easy for everyone to get access to this, we provided many ways, if not too many, to get access to the environment. So the easiest way to do this is use our built-in things like the web shell and the web browser. So with this, I can click on web shell, enter my password again, and I get SSH into a Kali box in the environment. And if you don't know, Kali is a distribution for penetration testing and hacking and all that stuff. So right now I'm at a computer inside our environment, and I can start pretty much doing whatever I want. I can start doing network scans with Nmap, I can launch Metasploit, I can do whatever. That's one way to get in the environment, and it's fairly straightforward to get in that way. If you are more comfortable with using SSH, you can simply SSH instead. So there's this line here. If I wanted to, I can type this into a terminal, or if you have PuTTY on a Windows system, you can just type that in here, and it'll pretty much be the same interface. It'll just be from an SSH window instead of your browser, so that's another option. We've also provided a VPN, so if you want to put your own laptop or computer on our network for full access to anything, so you can launch attacks and scans from your own computer instead of relying on ours, the VPN's good for that. In the email we sent to you, there's a link to the email, or there's a link to the VPN config you can download, as well as on the website here. And so I don't know if you wanted to walk through that when you get back up here, but if you're on a Linux system at least, or a Mac system, you can download, well, I guess on any system, you can download the Openvpn client. And I'll just demo what that looks like here on a Linux system. It should be similar for Mac, I'm not really sure. But I downloaded this file here, IASG.ovpn. I'm going to run the Openvpn command with sudo.
And if you guys have Windows, I'll walk through that after Keene's done, just so you know.
And the name of the VPN file, enter sudo password, which I can never do in front of a crowd, so we'll see if this, I got it. Okay, so you enter your credentials there again. Oops, I think that worked. Yep, so that'll put you on our network. I failed to enter my password there, but that's fine. So once you're on the VPN, you're pretty much on the same network as those Kali boxes, so from there you can attack and scan everything. And we'll talk about where that stuff is in a second for the example. And lastly, there's another option to access the environment from your web browser. It's very buggy and unreliable, so I wouldn't recommend using it except for this exercise today, perhaps. So there's a web browser within a browser. So this pretty much drops you inside the environment and gives you a web browser that can access websites in there. So for example, I can type in a web address in this green bar up here. Almost everything's going to be under the domain IASG.net. So for example, if I wanted to access DVWA, which is the Damn Vulnerable Web App, I can do that address there. And I get thrown into this login page, which is all inside our environment. So I don't know what the credentials are for that, and then Daniel will show you his in a second. So I think that's all I have for getting access to the environment. Does anybody have any questions on anything with the ISELab stuff at all? Any questions on accessing that? Anyone having any issues at all? If so, let me know and I'll take a look at it. But otherwise, I'll hand it back to Daniel, who's going to do some cool interactive stuff using ISELab. Thank you. Think I covered everything?
Yeah, I think so. Once I get this mic in here. Okay, so what we're gonna do next, I'm just gonna go through how to use the Openvpn config file on Windows, just in case if some of you have Windows as well. So we'll go over that real quick here. Perfect. Okay, so this is just Windows 7 in a VM, but should be pretty much the same for Windows 10 as well. So essentially, you'll just open up your browser and you'll Google OpenVPN. This is where it gets a bit confusing. You don't want to go to this page and hit download here because Private Tunnel is going to download, which is a bit different than just the OpenVPN. So if you click on the actual downloads page and you head down over here to the installer, it's the openvpn-install.exe is pretty much what you want.
Oh,
So if-
one more thing.
yeah,
Your net ID is not your student ID. I know someone typed that in, but don't do that.
yeah. So you'll go ahead and install that, and then once you have it installed and you run it, it'll show up in your tray here. And if you download the attachment to your email for verification, which is something IASG.OVPN, which is the config file for OpenVPN, you can right-click here, hit import file, locate that file that you downloaded. Mine's named a bit different, but pretty much the same thing. I already have it imported, but you'll get a verification message, and then you can go ahead and hit connect. Type in your username and password that you set up, if I can remember it. And then that's pretty much how you do it on Windows. So, and then, yeah, you'll get a little verification there. So, I'm gonna head over to my, I actually don't think this really matters too much, but no, it doesn't. Okay, let me go back to my slides real quick. I'm just gonna pull up something that you guys are gonna wanna look at here. Okay, so the target is basically a box that I developed for the SEC DSM CTF that was a few weeks ago, or last week, I don't really remember anymore. So if you guys were there, nobody actually got to this box, so nobody's really seen this before. It's a pretty simple box. There are 3 major goals for SQL injection. I'm gonna tell you right now that pretty much everything else is patched. There's no other way into this box. If you wanna do like Nmap and DERB scans and all this other stuff, go ahead, but you won't get too far with it. So if you just go to that web page once you're on the proxy or you're using that web interface that Keene set up, the browser within a browser, you go to that page and you're doing the manual SQL injection there. So that being said, we'll get to the goals in just a second, but does anybody have any questions or issues getting in within IASG ISELab? Raise your hand if you've been able to get in. Make an account and get in. Okay, awesome. Okay, if you guys have questions at any time, just raise your hand, yell, and we'll come help you guys out. But you've got 3 major goals on this box. So when you go to that web page, you're basically going to see a login, username and password. So the first goal is to bypass that login page because you don't know the username and password account, or the username and password. You can see down here that there's admin user on that login page. That's one of the goals, to get their password, but you don't know it. So first thing, you want to SQL inject to bypass that login page. Very simple SQL injection. We can go over that if needed. And then the second goal, once you're past that, you'll see a query that you can basically enter a employee's ID and get the information based on them, some contact information and notes. The goal for that is to get ID 42's information. I'll tell you right now that it's restricted, but with SQL injection, there are multiple ways that you can bypass that. I made it a bit easier in this instance. And so it should be relatively easy to get that. We can also help if you guys are stuck. And then the final goal, which might be a bit tougher because you have to extract data from not the same table that it's actually querying, but a different table. So you're going to be unioning a select command basically to find the other table's name and then extract the user admin's password from that. And so those are the 3 major goals of this box. And then we'll just spend 20-25 minutes working on this. And Keene and anybody else on cabinet that knows SQL injection, we can just walk around and help you guys out. And we'll just go from there. So this is all manual SQL injection. If you try to throw a SQL map at it, which is basically just script kiddie's dream for SQL injection, you won't get too much. I've had people try it and it didn't really get too far. So you really want to try the manual SQL injection. There are SQL injection cheat sheets online that you can look at. And I'll just tell you right now, it's a MariaDB database. So that may help you out as well. So raise your hand if you have any questions or if you're stuck on anything. But right now we're at 5:40, so let's take 10 minutes and try to get the first one. At 5:50, I'll go over how to get the first flag, and then we'll give another 10 minutes and then we can go over the other two as well. Has anybody gotten past that, just out of curiosity?
Past what?
The login page. Okay, so I'll show you guys how it's done. Okay, so I'll just run through how you get past this login page. If you just type in random garbage, it'll tell you failed login. Sorry about that. And so what we can do here is basically following along the slides. Okay, so pretty much this is what we want. So we have a username field and we have a password field. We pretty much just want to end the query and then basically tell it to return basically true so that we can log in. And so the way we do that is, so we have our username field. There's, yeah, those are all my, so we could type in, there's a lot of different ways you can do it, but for example, we could do 1 equals 1 and then comment that out. And that will actually get us right past the entire thing. If we knew that there was an admin user, which we do, we could type in admin for there and then pretty much type in the same thing. So for 1 equals 1, and then that'll get us past that. Does anybody not understand that or understand why that works? Is anybody confused on that? Has everyone, now that I've shown it, been able to get past? Raise your hand if you have not.
Can you type it one more time?
Yes. So to just get past all of it, what we can do is type quotation. So that basically ends, you're ending this part right here of the query, right here, and you're manually inputting that. And then, sorry, so many windows. And then we type or 1 is equal to 1 because that evaluates to true. You could also do or true. And then the comment to comment out the rest of the line is dash dash. And then you can either do space or you'll commonly see another dash just as a placeholder there. And then if you hit submit on this, then you'll get by. Okay, so that's how you do the first flag. That's how you bypass the login page. So in the meantime, start working on the next one. So your goal here, you basically have a query to all the different employees now. So different table you're dealing with. So if you type in a number like 75, it says no employee found with that ID. Use a low-level assigned ID numbers beginning at 1. So if we try 1, we get somebody's information. So you see first name, last name. There's notes there. So we can start kind of enumerating this manually, just going through. But if we go too high, no employee found with that ID. If we go lower and just keep going up, we finally get to 42, which says restricted support ID. Please use employee level IDs only. During the CTF, you would have been like, well, now we need to look at this because maybe this is something of interest. So your goal is to basically extract the 42. So the way I have it now, which is a bit easier, if you can figure out a way to basically dump the entire table which is pretty much, you're going to be using exactly what we use to bypass the login page. You want to evaluate, end that query and evaluate to true so that it dumps the entire table. Once it does that, you're essentially bypassing the PHP restriction of inputting 42 to be able to see the entire table, which will include 42's content. So let's take 10 minutes to try and do that. And if you get it, let me know. I'm going to show you first how you get it, and then I'm actually going to show you the PHP code behind it. So, go. Okay, we're going to go to that in a sec. That's not what I want to do. All right, so we want to get to 42, but we can't because there's a restriction on that. So what we can do is anything can really go here. We could do 1, we could do X, we could do anything. I'll just do nothing. And I'm going to end that part of the query by doing a single quotation mark. And then I'm going to do, because I want to dump the entire table. I want to be able to see all the contents because it's limiting me from typing in 42, which most likely is something in PHP, or that's what I'm likely thinking. So what I can do is type or 1 equals 1, basically the exact same thing we did last time. And then we can do the comment, so dash dash space dash. And if we hit submit, like you saw, you basically get all this junk that's printed out. And it's kind of weird because you're showing 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, almost like it is looped. If we do a control F for 42, and I realize I didn't have the mic on, my apologies. If we do control F for 42, that doesn't help. Of course, okay, let's try. All right, phone numbers, thanks. Yeah, we're just gonna go all the way down. In the CTF, you knew you had to find Damien Spoits. That's the guy's name, Damien, so we'll just do a search for Damien. So sorry I didn't tell you that. But basically takes you all the way down to the bottom, and then the password is right here. So that would be the flag in the CTF. And so that is your answer. So does that make sense? You're essentially dumping the entire table by ending the query and evaluating something that's always going to be true. That's dumping the entire table, all the contents. And I'll show you why it's kind of in this weird loop. So here's the actual, let's see if I can make this bigger here. How do they make it smaller and now can't make it bigger? All right. Okay. Of course, now I'm having issues with this. All right, let's try this. Nope. All right, stand by. Sorry. Try this again, because this terminal doesn't want to work now. Okay. Sorry if that's a little bit small, but essentially if we walk through this here, we're connecting to the database using this file, which is in the directory above, and then this is our query. Select all from clients, which is the name of the table, where ID is equal to the inputted ID. So that's what you're giving it. So by giving it a single quotation, we're ending this part of the query, and then what we're doing is typing or 1 equals 1, -- which just comments out the rest of it, and then that will dump the entire table. And so we can see here that it was PHP code that was restricting us. So if the inputted ID is equal to 42, then print that out that you can't get there, and then it's basically a simple if-else. If the number of rows that the query returns is equal to 0, then no employee was found. And if that's not the case, then there's a while loop that prints out everything associated. And so the reason you were seeing the weird loop is because of this while loop. In the actual CTF, I had taken that out, but this makes it easier in that you can dump the entire table with one command, and that gives you everything. So that's the actual PHP code behind it. And the final step of this box, the final goal is to get the password for the admin account on here, so the admin login. And the way you do that is you're basically going to be unioning a select command that can get you into the user's table, and then you can extract the password that way. This was poorly written in that the passwords were not hashed, so it's all plain text, and then you'd submit the flag for that. So let's take like 5 minutes here if you guys want to do some research into the like SQL injection cheat sheets and look for some union statements, and then we'll take 5 minutes and I'll show you how that step is done, because it is a bit more complex than the other two, but you're going to be using union and selecting the user's table and extracting the admin's password. So that's the goal behind the last step. Columns that are in the user's table, and we can go into later if anyone's interested how to find out the names of the tables, or I can post it in Slack. But essentially what you want to do first is, like I was saying, enumerate the number of columns that are in there. So if we do like 5, we don't get anything. If we do 6, we don't get anything. And then if we do 7, we basically get an error. So that tells us that there are 6 columns in the user's table. And so that means, like I was showing before, when we do the union select command, you can see it right there. When we do the union select command, we have to do, if we want like the username and password, then we need to also have 4 nulls if we don't have anything else to put in there, so that we can extract this data. And so since you guys already saw it, I'll just input it there. So the actual command, we don't really need anything there, but so union select, and then we do 1, 2, 3 nulls. You could actually just do 4 nulls and then username and password from users, because that's the name of the table, where 1 is equal to 1, that will evaluate to true, and then we comment out whatever may be left in that query. And if we hit submit, then it gives us the username, which we asked for, and then the password of the admin user. And then if we go ahead and grab that, and we go back to the login page, we can verify that by typing in admin, pasting the password, and we get in. And so that would be the final flag. So again, it's determining, using order by, the number of columns that are in the users table, and then unioning a select SQL query or select SQL command with the correct amount of nulls, the correct amount of values that you want, username, password, and then from the users table where something that evaluates to true. So does that make sense? Does anybody have questions on that one? That's more of a bit advanced one. And there are actually more steps that you would need to do in terms of determining the table name as well. So if you guys want to come up and talk about that after the meeting, I'd be more than willing to run you through that as well. So, and the last thing we'll cover here is, so how do we protect against SQL injection? Your number one option is to use what are called parameterized queries and prepared statements. I've got an example up there that I found in Wikipedia of like a SQL query. This is for insert into, inserting data in, but this is the important part here. So the SQL code is written first, and then the values that go into the actual SQL command, instead of directly inputting them from user input, those values that are inputted from the user are binded at a later time, which mitigates completely the risk of SQL injection, because that is happening at a later time in a more controlled environment. So that's your best bet. It's the best way to write SQL code, especially when interfacing with web apps. And then also input validation, and that basically means you're sanitizing the input that the user is giving you. For example, you have a switch statement there, which you guys may have seen if you've taken like 227, 228, anything like that. Basically, the table name would be something that the user would input, and you have your cases, if it's equal to this, if it's equal to that. If not, the default, you're going to throw an error saying that that's unexpected, I don't know what to do, so don't do anything, rather than running that query and executing the arbitrary code that you injected. And then another thing, what you can do is sanitizing input is like banning actual characters, so like the apostrophe, the single quotation mark. Keene, I know, have you said you've had issues with that with your last name? Not being able to...
Yeah, please don't limit what can go to names.
Yeah, so this is why I said can be good, because some people that write web apps and stuff will actually restrict the ability, like Keene's last name, O'Kelley, apostrophe Kelly, will restrict being able to put apostrophe in, and now Keene can't use his real name. So that's why it can be good, but you don't want to limit the user's ability to actually fully utilize what you're providing. So that's something that you need to be careful about. But the number one step for protecting against SQLi is using those parameterized queries and prepared statements. And so with that, that's all I have for this presentation. If you guys have any additional questions, I'll stick around for a bit, or you can hit me up on Slack, or in general, and any of the cabinet can help you out. And yeah, so like I said, if you guys, we mentioned swag. If you guys have any ideas on that, post in Slack or come talk to us, and then we'll be setting a date to work on that code breaker, and then hope to see you guys at the CDC as well. So yeah, thanks for coming out, everyone.
Puzzler.
Oh, you want to talk about the puzzler? Yeah, we have a puzzler real quick. I'll let you take care of that.
All right. All right, so I had about 5 solutions to this puzzler, so good job to those of you. First one was a picture of Bob Rossio's painting. That was kind of a hint they wanted to open this one up in Paint. Bit of a stretch maybe, but whatever. So nice thing about this picture is there is this big old chunk of white space, and it's all the same shade of white. So that makes it easy to hide a string of text that is similar in color but not completely the same. So if we write our text in a shade that's like 6 bits off from the background, it's not visible when you just look at it, but if you take your paint bucket tool and just drop it in, it's visible like that. So, hold on, zoom in. Had about, I think, 5 solutions total, so congratulations to, I'm getting pulled up, Nick, Derek, Nathan, Lucas, and Harry. And puzzler 2 is up right now, and I know I have 1 solution to it already. Nathan, who's Nathan? You're Nathan. Good job solving the puzzle before it was announced. The rest of you, it's up right now if you guys want to check it out. Any questions about this one? No? All right, that's all for me.
So that's none of the other cabinets. Okay, so that's the meeting, and then hope to see you guys at the CDC.